All right. Hello to everybody that's tuning in with the Coaches Corner. How are our lovely guests and coaches tonight?
Good. It's awesome seeing you.
Yeah.
Hey, guys.
Not lovely, but doing good. You're the lovely one there.
Yeah.
You got that one.
See, I always love doing this with you all because you just flattery. It gets you so far.
Well, we definitely have a fun episode tonight, I'm sure. So.
Yes, sir.
So everybody that is coming in and getting settled right now, just a couple words before we get started. You're welcome to ask questions. Just post them in the chat box. I will pass them off, and hopefully we'll have time to get to everything. But if we don't, our lovely coaches are wonderful about responding even after the show. With that being said, I am going to disappear, and I'm handing this off to your Grace Duke Brannos.
All right. So tonight we have a very interesting episode. And I think I don't tend to do these types of episodes. It's our Elephant in the Room series. Tonight's title is Policing Your Own. And I think that pretty much covers some of, or a lot of the issues we're going to talk about. In the description, we talked about, the dangers of ego. And I capitalized ego because that ego is not just the other guy's ego, but it's your own ego itself, and how you have to also keep that in check, and that's not easy. So just beware. And we're also going to try to build in, and hopefully it comes up at things like ownership and the big red word bullying. These are all really complex subjects, and there is no perfect way. Everybody has their own view of each one of these things, and you may disagree with us. That's fine. I probably may disagree with some people here, however it goes. But there are things that people want to hear about, and to tell you the truth, this is a case where it's good to hear other people and their opinions, and make sure that you have some way to check yourself, and you know that there are people out there doing stuff like that, right? So, and that there are people spending time trying to make sure that we have a group of people in society that do our best at the honorable combat that we're supposed to do. So tonight, the great part is I brought in a ringer for me, because I tend to be a eternal optimist. So I brought a ringer in. I brought one of my best friends, my squire brother. I can't tell you more than somebody that I look at and wish I could be like, and that is Duke Valharic. He's had the opportunity to travel almost all of, or a lot of kingdoms. He's lived in at least 3 different kingdoms, and I think he spends a lot of his own personal time helping resolve a lot of these issues. Not only in those kingdoms, other kingdoms themselves. And also joining us is, of course, Viscount Sagan, Viscount Tristan, and Jarl Thorfinn. And we're all going to do what we do. Tonight's going to be all about, try to answer some questions, try to relieve you of the idea that people just get away with stuff, and try to give you a way to take a look at yourself and see if maybe you're the guy that you should be pointing at yourself. So let's start. I'm going to start with a couple of the quick topics and things we usually talk about in a forum to lead into these shows, and I'm going to let Sagan kind of bring up a couple of quick notes.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. As His Grace said, the topic for tonight has been one that has been spoken of, I'm quite sure, in every kingdom in the known world at one time or another. We are here tonight to try and assist in a discussion of here's what we see, here's what we think, and here's how we would recommend, or this is how we have dealt with this subject in the past. This is not meant to be a downer in any way. This is meant to be positive. So some of the things we are going to discuss are some of the basics of this. In all things, especially in deeds, there are things like honor, accountability, and ownership. Those are topics that we will come into this one by one or collectively, in that we've all experienced them. Just as chivalry, honor, and largesse are the bright shining stars, and they are present in every kingdom in the known world, so are some things that need to be discussed, and we will discuss them now. Thank you, Your Grace.
So let's go back. Tristan, you did a nice job of writing out kind of some key points, and we're going to try to get kind of make sure that we tap a little bit of all of them. But if we don't, we will bring up another episode. And if you guys just feel like we missed something, post it. This is all about questions, guys, and we're going to try to be as truthful as we can. I know these guys, and they'll, in a lot of ways, they're going to call a spade a spade. And the idea of using names and stuff, we're going to stay away from that tonight. But the piece of actions, we'll talk about those actions. So, Tristan?
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And welcome everybody. This episode means a lot to me personally. In my spread over the SCA, I've been local marshal, regional marshal, earl marshal, deputy seneschal. I guess they chose the title of special projects, deputy of special projects, which was essentially dispute resolution. I got enough experience through my experiences both in the SCA and in the mundane world with dispute resolution, and I started to become a mediator because these issues, regardless of what the nature of a dispute is, whether it's two fighters on a field trying to dispute who won their fight or who hit the other one successfully, all the way up to interpersonal actions, it really just comes down to how do you resolve a dispute. And the first, I'm going to just come at it from the way that a mediator would bring two parties together to try to resolve their issues that they have with one another. And I've not only had this issue with fighters on the field, their behavior on the field, but also off the field behavior, interpersonal stuff, to the point that it got, highly explosive, went all the way to R&Ds and that sort of thing. This taught me a great deal. And one of the things that it taught me was the importance of not letting these issues go unaddressed. If you take a small problem and you ignore it, hoping that it will go away, it will usually become bigger. And the more you ignore it, the more that the behavior will be endorsed and accepted, and it will grow to be a problem that will rage like a wildfire out of control. So that's one of the points. But the first one that I want to get to is the simple point of identifying the behavior that's causing the problem. And what we're talking about here is not necessarily a fighter that misses one single blow or even has one ugly fight. We're talking about a chronic problem, somebody who is consistently behaving in ways that they seem to find acceptable, or they just believe are acceptable. Maybe they misunderstand the rules. There's some kind of a rule or accepted standard of behavior that they missed. They just don't get it, and they think they're doing it correctly. So identifying that there's a problem going on. Usually this is fairly easy to do. The worse the infraction and the longer it goes, the more everybody notices it. So it's one of those things, it pays to notice these things early. Certainly don't panic and go into hysterics when you spot them, when you spot something like this, but it is something you have to notice and address. And by the way, I do want to say, Brannos did a good job of inviting comments. I think this is one of those subjects that I just want to reiterate. If you have questions or comments, please get them in. These disputes often are problems that people are not comfortable talking about. They would rather avoid it, rather ignore it. But this episode is a time to just say, hey, I've got an issue. What do you guys think about this? We'd love to hear that. So with that said, I'll go on. Firstly, identifying the behavior that's causing the issue is important. It's the easiest thing in the world to just, well, it's not that bad. I'm just going to kind of let it go. Or it's somebody else's problem and I'll let them deal with it. Or, maybe it'll just go away. Maybe if I just ignore it, it'll just pass along. This procrastination opens the door for letting that behavior become more and more chronic and grow like a seed. So keep that in mind as you identify behavior that is causing an issue, either with yourself or with other people. And one of the things about this episode too that I want to touch on before I get to the rest of these is the subject is policing our own, not necessarily just policing yourself. Those are two very different topics. Usually the person that thinks about policing themselves is not the problem child. Policing our own is policing and trying to deal with somebody's bad behavior that is part of your own group. And that group could be your local landed shire, your barony. It could be your household, somebody in your own little group of friends that's misbehaving, and we're going to touch on this too, with perhaps within the order of chivalry. We'll get to that in a little bit more, but it's within a group that you belong to. So you have some ownership over their behavior. Their behavior reflects on you and other people in the group, and you feel it needs to be addressed. So that's kind of the scope of policing our own and kind of what that means. The second one I want to point out is avoid delays. And that is, I touched on a little bit earlier, of procrastinating and thinking, well, if I just ignore this, they'll go away. If, somebody's acting like an asshole and is obnoxious chronically, that they just won't get friends and they'll just kind of disappear. I've seen those people stay around for decades. And they will attract, like attracts like, they will attract more people like them when they continue to participate. So you either deal with the problem and address it, or they're going to grow into become a larger group. So when I say avoid delays, I don't mean rush and just confront somebody the instant you get upset or you see something. Definitely choose the time and the place for having a direct contact with them. Try to discuss it man to man or woman to woman, person to person. Do that. That's the honorable thing to do. Choose your time, but don't just ignore it and hope for weeks and months and years later that it will just have fixed itself. Have a mind for taking ownership over the problem, even if it's not necessarily your problem. It might be your friend's problem, but they may need your help in resolving it. That might come along being you're coaching them to actually go and confront that person and say, hey, I've got this issue. I'd like to work it out with you. I'd like to put this behind us, or I'd like to, get on a positive path. But for right now, things are not cool. And this takes some skill, and some people are not equipped for that. And they may need some coaching. They may need some mentoring and how to keep a cool head, how to have an uncomfortable conversation like that. View yourself like a mediator or like a coach that's going to try to guide them through it gently and give them that support. A big rule of thumb, the next point.
Actually, before we go on to the next one,
yeah,
I'd like to actually go back to identify behavior first.
Absolutely, let's do it.
So let's go ahead and let the cat out of the bag. We can call it identified behavior, or we can call it people are cheating.
Yeah.
We can say some people just outright cheat. Some people have such big egos, they don't even realize they're cheating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people have armor issues, right? Mm-hmm. So, I guess let's talk about how do we identify these issues with people. I mean, you guys, Tristan, Valharic, you both have been in kingdom resolution cases and society, lots of society resolution cases. Mm-hmm. But identifying the behavior, do you guys kind of have a way that you go down and check mark some of that stuff?
Go ahead, Val. Why don't you go first?
Usually I cut right to the chase and I go to the individual and I say, hey, look, this is the perception of your actions. Mm-hmm. Are you aware that people perceive you this way? And that opens the discussion. And in that discussion, I try to have them define their problem. Sometimes they say, oh, I didn't realize that. And it can be as easy as, well, let me throw a telling blow to your helmet. Maybe you've got a dead spot there. Maybe you're padded wrong. Maybe you're not feeling it. But I assure you, this is, a clear and unimpeded blow. And if they go, oh, I need to I need to adjust my helmet. Well, then we all breathe easier, and it's usually the happiest outcome that can happen. But a lot of times they'll immediately go on the defensive, and that's when, you know, you really have to be exceptionally calm and not escalate the situation to a bad place.
Mhm.
So really, I would say the first thing in defining the issue is to have a candid conversation with the individual and see where they stand. And also, it's very important during that time that you be willing to listen to them and not be so excited about solving the problem that you don't give them the opportunity to define the problem in their own words.
Thorfinn, you got something to say?
Yeah, you know, I think that one of the things that His Grace is talking about, also, this is a thing that builds. So it's not like you're going to see someone that the first time they're having an issue, right? You're going to see a history of this. Like, people are going to be probably talking about this person at practice or at events, saying like, oh, the marshal will be like, oh, we need to watch this person, right? And so you're going to see that that, you know, having the courage to go and talk to them after you've established you know, enough experience with their behavior, then you can go into it with, you know, kind of evidence or, you know, that type of a thing. So that way, I think it's important to realize that it's not going to be, you're not going to do this to someone who's like having their first bad day. This is a systemic problem with that person we're talking about. Thanks.
Yeah, the identifying behavior to me is when you start hearing the rumors, the scuttlebutt, the fighter that other fighters don't want to spar with at practices. They don't want, they talk about, you know, meeting them in a tournament, and they're like, oh, I hope that doesn't happen. To me, those are those little indicators that there's a problem going on. And generally, when it goes on long enough, everybody knows. They just don't want to say anything because they don't want to let that bubble to the surface. But the waters underneath are pretty tumultuous. Sagan, do you have anything to jump in with?
Yeah, there is a couple of things. Your Grace Valharic, we have not met. I am bonded to your words. Yes. Do not escalate.
Mm-hmm.
You do when you need, you feel a need to speak with someone, do it openly, do it honestly, and do it measured. Again, you please don't go into it with a predetermined idea of the outcome. Please be courteous and respectful. The idea of identifying this behavior, as His Excellency Thorfinn said, and his Graces have said, it's across time usually. This isn't the first instance or incident. It's usually over time. And over time is something that we will discuss as far as measures that could be taken. But please, in all things, especially in this one, be kind and be respectful. Thank you.
So, you know, I threw a question up in our chat if somebody had private question. And you guys are, if people don't want to throw stuff up in chat and you want something to be said, feel free to reach out to any one of us in private and ping us. You know, I specifically am watching both the chat and my chat. You're welcome to throw stuff there. But so I think the key, the question, or actually the comment here is that some people feel like talking to a cheater or is when the stuff is happening. So all of a sudden you're kind of determined to win, so you call them out for it. And then you both lose honor in the end, right? So I mean, I guess, what do you guys, is that kind of one of those places you don't want to get into? And I think value, you kind of covered this a little bit, is you have to go in with a level head, right? You want to talk about that?
One of the other things that's a really good way to get a person to a conversational point, even if they're heated, is a lot of times I look for, if I don't have a personal relationship with the individual, I look for someone that I know has a level head and has a personal relationship, someone that individual with the problem respects. And I get them as an ally going into that conversation. I don't ever want it to look like there's a gang of us coming to talk to you, but if it's one other individual that puts the problem person at ease, that can go a long way to starting a dialogue.
Yes. Your Grace, if I may.
Yes, please.
To what His Graceful Heart just said, I have been, again, as Viscount Tristan, I have served as a marshal in all the capacities, from baronial to a very short stint as a deputy Earl Marshal with the SCA. As Kingdom Earl Marshal, I too employed the same tact, right? By the time it got to me, where people were coming to me and saying, you have to act, it's like, well, what have you done? Have you taken any action at all? Have you spoken to this individual? And usually the answer was no. And I too would seek out the counsel of someone I knew to be a friend or a close relation to this person, such as spouse, or you know, the consort, to say, I need assistance with this. Because there's nothing like having the Earl Marshal walking up to you to sort of set the tone right away that, okay, this is not going to be good. But the other side of this, Your Grace, is I would like to move on to the second comment, right? Almost a stain to my honor if I do this. And we have spoken about this in some other presentations where we do ride the double-edged sword. We are told you are not to question the honor or the ability of your opponent. And yet we're told on this side, it's up to you to act if you feel something is untoward. And whoever posted that question, that comment, I mean, they're right. It is another aspect of this that is very, very commonplace.
So I'm going to go back to the other side of this issue is, and then somebody brought this up, and it's exactly to the point of now they just don't tell you the truth. So in other words, you're at practice, you're fighting, and you think that, you know, there's an issue that, you know, you want the truth. Did I hit you? You know, did you hit me hard enough? But everybody wants to make excuses. Everybody wants to be the nice guy or girl. And then we end up into a place where there's no truth going on. And when that person goes to a tournament and doesn't take the same shot, all of a sudden they're the problem. But they were never given an opportunity not to be that problem. So I think a really important part becomes the truth, right?
It does. It's not honorable to go away and grumble and be angry and upset and kind of smolder on the fact that you thought your opponent was a cheater, but you didn't call him out on it, and then carry that baggage around with you, because it's going to, sooner or later, it's going to come to the surface. At very least, it's going to eat away at you, thinking you got robbed, you know, of a win or whatever inside of you is upset that there was a dispute and it never got addressed.
Yeah, so I think that circles back to the idea of having the courage to talk to the person in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. Is that we have to maintain this kind of open line of communication. And a little bit later, I'll probably end up going into like a talk about the breakdown of this kind of communication or open communication inside of fighting. Okay. But once you have that, the reason you have to have this like conversation is that success through bad behavior just fortifies more bad behavior, right? So if you see this person and they're succeeding in our game, right, by cheating without us addressing it, it just fortifies their behavior. And then people will see that, like someone mentioned earlier, and they will emulate that, right? And so then this is where you start to see groups of people that have high calibration issues, and people will say, like, we all know they have high calibration issues because this person that they learned from showed them this kind of success system. And there's times where, you know, you have to wonder, does that person know? Well, sometimes they do, and sometimes they've been called out on it and they're still doing it. And there is recourse that we have, and we'll go through all that later. But there is, a whole thing where you have to think to yourself, if I don't say something, if I don't be proactive in this moment, right, to say, hey, I think that this is what happened just now, then you're allowing them to succeed with this bad behavior. And so, which I think is, don't be afraid to take that moment. And it's going to suck. Everyone here has said that. It's going to suck to have to say to someone, because we don't do that in our real world. We don't go up to people and say like, hey, you're fucking up, right? That's not a thing we do. But this is the place where, our game is weird. It's the only sport in the world where the only time you win is when your opponent tells you you win. And so if you have this breakdown of communication, it allows this to kind of fester a bad set of behaviors. Thanks, guys.
And I think that the word that Sagan used was ownership. When you do this, try to look at this not from, this is my personal investment in winning this particular fight that's making me broach this subject. You're really protecting the fighting community and the SCA by having people abide by the rules. You're trying to protect their reputation, because if they're going around exhibiting bad behavior, they're cheating, and you fight them and you lose and you walk away, your reputation isn't harmed. Theirs will build, and therefore the fighting community will have this poison within it that will spread, because more people will see that guy win, and they'll start say, well, if that's what it takes to win, I'll do that. And now you're basically taking ownership over the entire fighting community, even though you may be just one little sliver of it.
So I think for the person that asked specifically about practice and how do you get people to tell you the truth, if you don't feel like you're getting the truth at practice, first make sure everybody knows you absolutely need it and want the feedback. The second piece is get out of the habit of a yes/no scenario. In other words, can you do me a favor and grade that shot 1 to 5? And if you find that you're at the bottom level, because people are more comfortable with like, well, that was about a 2. So now in your head, you can say, well, I don't think it was probably very good, or if they say it's a 2 and you thought it was a 2, then you're pretty good. So you can kind of take away the you're right, I'm wrong, and get more of a grade on how that's happening. And people are more comfortable with it than just saying, no, you missed it, you're wrong. So I think that's one way to help bridge that space. And just so everybody knows, and you guys all see it in the chat going on. There's lots of great questions. We're posting it up constantly here, where it's going to be very difficult to go through them all and still touch on some subjects that we want to touch on. But we're definitely going to try. And if we have a lot more, we'll keep them and we'll do another episode. So don't worry about that too much. Somebody want to cover one of these questions real quick?
Yeah, we had one about the knight-squire relationship dynamic,
yes.
and I asked them to elaborate, because the question seems to be kind of vague, but they did elaborate, and it said, should a squire call out a knight or let their knight take care of an issue, or what have you? And I'm presuming that the scenario might be, let's say a squire is fighting a knight who's not their knight. The squire feels that the knight just isn't letting them win, even though they're getting hit. And they figure, well, maybe my knight should go over and talk to that other knight because I'm just a squire. I mean, this question seems to come up a lot with, do I have enough rank to tell somebody that's more experienced that I think I hit him and I think I was doing pretty good. One of the things you find in life, it's not so much what you do or what you say, it's how you do it and how you say it. Anybody that's in armor, I didn't even say authorized it, but if you're out there fighting somebody, you definitely have enough ownership to say, hey, something is not going right. Let's talk this out. I want to understand. And a good way to do it is to avoid the confrontational, why aren't you taking my shots approach, and say, help me out, help me out here. I think I'm landing some clean shots. Tell me what's going on, because I'm not understanding what's happening here. And that doesn't matter what rank you are, whether you're a duke fighting a squire, you can do that, or whether you're a squire fighting a knight or a duke or anything, you have that right to just say, hey, something's not, I don't understand what's going on here. This is what it seems like to me, but I'd like to have your perspective on it, that word dialogue that Valharic used, I think it lands right squarely there. It should be a conversation.
Yeah.
So Val, do you have something on this?
What I tend to do if I have a squire that is having a problem, say with another knight, and that I will mentor them in the conversation, but the conversation is theirs to have. I will go and I will make sure that they're heard, but I will make sure that it's their words that they're hearing, not my words.
Yes.
I think anybody on the path needs to be able to have a constructive adult conversation where they tell somebody, I disagree with you. I don't understand why the situation is the way that it is, and I need you to explain that to me. And I feel like we need to be accountable and we need to have that answer. And if we don't have that answer when we're asked that question, that's when we need to do some self-policing.
Agreed. I totally agree. The idea of fighters come to the field as they are. That's one way to look at it. But we're all familiar with the knight-squire relationship. And if there is an agreement between the two individuals, so be it. The way I looked at it with my squires was it was my job to prepare them for this situation or for any situation where there was negativity involved, and how to be fair and how to be courteous and how to be kind. But above all, there are things in kingdom law. We have our known fighting conventions. We have our rules of the list. There's a lot of things that I required that they know. Now, in training, what I would do is I would all of a sudden tell one of the trainees, ignore everything you're hit with. And I don't care who's hitting you with it. And let's see what happens. And this would happen, in a mock tournament situation, right? And then when it got to a point where I noticed people were shaking their head or they were making faces, it's like, okay. So now I would go to that individual and say, okay, here's the situation. How would you handle it? And give them the opportunity to actually exercise it before it is crown or before it is any sort of tournament and they're faced with having to deal with it.
So just because we're going to move on to some other questions, there's one common there's a bunch of people commenting on this. And that is calibration differences between tournaments. Is that cheating? Or, if I'm at practice, I take lighter because I'm, just kind of hanging out and having a good time. And then when I'm in, a local tournament, I'm like, okay, everything's kind of cooking along and I'll maybe take it a little harder. And then when I'm in a high end tournament, I all of a sudden, everything has to be perfect. Now there's lots of ways to think about that. I think one piece is, I think it goes down again, and everybody keeps pointing at Valharic here, but it comes down to communication. And that's what I try to really focus people on is at our turn, at a practice, say, hey, let's practice. That means, I might take some stuff, I might not. If somebody asks you, would you take that in a tournament? Then you should say, no, I'm taking it on the light side, or go back to, that was probably a 2 or 3. I'd probably just, I might take that, but it really isn't super sharp, right? And communicate that, because that helps them understand how they're hitting and things like that. And that goes both ways. And then at some point, you look at the other person and say, towards the end of the training session, look and say, hey, let's do some real crown fights. And then you just open a can of whatever you got. And I don't care if it's, you don't hurt them, but I don't care if it's Joe Blow who just started 3 weeks ago. Show them your game. And that game may be lower only because you don't have to put as much work into it to still kill him, and you believe that. But if you show him that, he gets to see it. If you never show somebody what the game is, it takes them a lot longer to learn it. That first day he blocks that, if you hit them, we do it at our practice. 3 crown fights. I'll hit somebody with the same blow 3 times in a row. until the following week when he blocks one of them. And then I'm like, hey, that's awesome. Now, now I got to think and figure out what I can do different. But he made progression. He knows those are crown fights. It's okay for me to be better. In fact, what he's doing is helping me turn that switch on and actually do a crown fight. Because way too often we have people that, and I've traveled a lot of places, and one of the first things I do when I go somewhere is like, I'll line all the knights on one side and all the unbelts on the other. And I'll go quietly talk to knights. I'm like, hey, do you guys like take it easy a little bit in practice on people? And, come on, guys. I mean, the guys I have here, do you open a can of whoop ass on everybody every time you go to a practice? No. Right? So, but they don't say that they're doing that. And then I'll turn around to the unbelts and say, hey, just to let you know, if I told you these guys weren't doing their hardest to fight you, how would you feel? And man, every one of those unbelts are pissed off. They are angry. But that's because the communication hasn't happened there. If all those knights are like, it's assumed that, they know I'm taking it easy. They may not know you're taking it easy. So again, that goes about communication. Thorfinn.
Yeah, I with trainees that I've been working with over the time I've been fighting, there are absolutely, they don't understand that, we have a lot more and kind of that we're different between practice and training and the actual tournament. And so periodically I will do like, okay, we're going to fight right now. Like it's, like you said, crown finals. And they've, what this is about is like reestablishing their expectations and reality of where they're at, because it's unfair for them to think that they're hyper succeeding against people when they're not. And so what I'll do is I'll say, okay, we've been training, now let's do it. And like you said, if I hit them with the same 3 blows in a row, well, that's those 3 fights we did, right? And then it also lets them know, hey, I've got a lot to learn, and I can still and then I can say like, hey, we're still in training, we are training together, like I'm helping you learn a skill set to succeed. And then eventually hopefully they surpass you, right? And so that's good too. So
go ahead, Bill.
So one thing that we have the opportunity to do is to impact the group systemically. So, I noticed people said, well, there are areas or groups that develop a higher level of calibration, or an individual develops success, and there's a group of people fighting like that. One thing that you can do, and that I've done, is go to that practice, and I start the practice, and I find one of the individuals, and part of being as traveled as I am is it gives me a good excuse to say, hey, I fight all over the place, and there are varying different calibrations. One tool I like to use is, we're just going to fight this, and every blow we're going to give each other feedback on. And I make sure that all of the other people are watching this exchange, and we go through that fight. And then we carry that to the next fight, and you create a dialogue there, and you're able to judge what everybody, by them discussing each individual blow as they throw through practice, you can get a real sounding for where that calibration of that practice is, and then address it if it needs to be addressed. But at least where you're starting from. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, Your Grace.
So just it's that calibration issue is a very broad issue of why stuff goes up in some fights. I will, I'm just going to say it straight out, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I don't care. You guys can all tell me, and I'll have to reduce my head size and my ego to accept it at some point.
No worries there, Your Grace.
And if I don't accept it, then some point I may get a knock on or a phone call and say, hey, don't bother showing up. And we're going to talk about that later, because believe it or not, guys, that does really happen. We don't get to hear about it often because it's negative and there are rules around stuff, but it does happen. I just want to make sure everybody knows. But there is a level of energy that is given in a practice. There's a level of energy when you're around your friends, and there's a level of energy that comes when you're around other great hard fighters. And our sport is not the only sport you see that in. You see that in boxing and wrestling. When you're in a normal tournament in wrestling and you're working hard, right? But that focus may be totally different than the focus when you make it to state. And you got to win a state tournament against a guy you have no clue, right? And so that level of focus starts driving those fights a little different. So beware, there is going to be difference. And it doesn't mean that it's right or wrong or somebody's cheating, but there's a difference. The piece is, if somebody has a behavior that it looks the same issue with everybody, then it goes back to the first conversation of that person should be talked to, or, at some point, I would not suggest that person gets talked to when you're hot and he's hot in the list. But, there is a point where, it's like, okay, is somebody going to come grab your knight or grab somebody that you think is, a marshal or whatever and say, can you watch some of this? Because that happens too. I see that crown. We have people that go into crown that we were like, man, I can't tell if that blow is good or not, because guess what? I'm not in his armor. I'm not the guy throwing the blow. I've seen the whole crowd go, yay, he can hit him. And the guy's like, no, that was crap. Right? So don't necessarily believe what you're seeing. The conversation, and if those two agree, right, and really agree, not the I'm an unbelt, so I have to agree, because that's bullshit too, but really agree, and they're like, let's do it again, then they do it again. I think in the end, if everybody announces, especially if the fighters themselves, like, no, I was in a heroics that I hit Hans, right, early off, and he went to the ground. I hit him in a leg, and he grounded, and I'm like, that was not good. Now, it may have been on the edge of being good, but to me, that wasn't good enough for that fight that I was having with him. And I wanted to, that you had a whole level of junk pool going on. And I asked him not to take it. And later on, he did the exact same thing back to me. And it was a wonderful fight, and he ended up winning. Okay? But so, be aware that there's a conversation in a fight, and sometimes it's verbal, and sometimes it's just like, no, I'm not going to let him take that because it wasn't good how I felt. So just be aware, the fighters do have that conversation. Try not to be the person jumping in and pointing it and ruining maybe some other people's times around you, oh my God, he's a cheater. And, his squire or, best friend or his ladies or her lord is sitting right behind you when you're saying stuff like that. Because that creates a ton of bad feelings too. The fight is on the field. If it looks like it over and over and over again, some point, people do have to go back to the first place and say, okay, we probably have a problem child. So Thorfinn, you had a quick.
So what you're talking about is like a level of trust between the two people, right? And with this, you guys have an open line of communication between each other, right? Where you're accepting what they're saying and doing, and you're allowing them to say the same to you, right? So it's open both ways. And what I want to talk about a little bit is the idea that when we started, and I'm talking about the SCA as a whole, not me, the idea of communicating with your opponent was kind of instilled as a thing we should do, right? Because we're wearing armor and things like that. So maybe things are different, and we're not actually cutting people's legs off. And so we had to talk to each other. But over time, what I think has happened, at least in my experience, is that you start to see where it only became a thing happened when someone was doing something negative, right? And so it only brings with it dishonor to that person and accusatory language. So if you were to have an open line of communication with the fighters all the time, like at practice and every tournament, and make it kind of ingrained in what we do, you won't have that problem as much. And so what you get is instead of saying, hey, how about that leg shot, and that person automatically says, oh my gosh, I was just called a cheater, right? Because that's the only way it communicates now, right? If I call you out on something, it's basically saying you're a cheater, right? Or at least I'm perceiving it that way. Now, what's interesting is that if we talk to each other all the time, even knowing that it's not a good blow, right? It just de-escalates all those things into common experience where we have no problem saying to each other like, hey, so what about that? And the guy goes, you know what? It felt like it glanced. Yeah, me too, right? But this makes it common for everybody. So this communication is allowed to happen in a non-negative way, right? And we have allowed this to become only negative. If we can all work to move it back towards it being a positive thing, you know, to talk to each other about these experiences we're sharing,
Well
because
said.
every fight is different and every fight has these kind of, like shots where, like you said, like maybe someone in the audience thinks that was a great shot. And then the person's like, you know, I don't know. And then the guy's like, hey, you know what? I think it glanced off, right? This allows that kind of beautiful communication to happen because it's open. The problem is we've forever allowed it to be broken, and we need to work at making this a connectivity thing, guys. That's what I'm trying to say, is connect with your opponent, be honest, but we need to do this in practice. We need to do it everywhere, so that way it's no big deal, and you're not dishonoring them by talking to them. And so that's
No, in fact, you're helping them in the long run.
yeah, and you're helping the whole fighting society.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I think, that as knights, as fighters, that's what we all need to work on. We all need to work on talking to each other more.
So just because we're burning through here, it's amazing how fast this is a subject probably go on for hours. And the good part was you just covered two things, right? We just covered a lot on how do we recognize these things, and we rolled right into the next comment or the next topic we were going to cover, Tristan, and that was maintain courtesy and chivalry. So do you want to give a short, just be aware that we're at about 25 after 8. So
yeah. Definitely. And this was covered, keep a cool head. And if you can't keep a cool head, and I loved Valharic, just buy a little time. You don't have to deal with this right this very instant. If you need to go take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, get some cool water, get your helmet off, get some shade, calm yourself down. You're not going to do anybody any favors. And this kind of comes into what Thorfinn was talking about, which is it won't do you good to communicate if you've got hot blood going. You will have a very hard time minding your mouth and not letting that come through. Even if your words, if you'd written them down, somebody could read them, they would look pretty nice. But the tone of your voice, all of that comes through with attitude. And was the last point, is the attitude is everything. When it comes to policing our own, which is the subject of the show, or dealing with a dispute yourself, if your intent is to prove you're right and they're wrong, I don't care what words come out of your mouth, you will likely have a big problem on your hands that will not go away by communicating. And so if you go in with an attitude, and this is a big thing with negotiations, if you go in thinking, I want both of us to win, I want to have both of us come away being happy that we did business with each other. If that's your attitude, you will be a very successful negotiator. And this is the same thing with the dispute. If you go in thinking, I have to prove myself right and I want to get my way, and they have to admit they're wrong, and of course you get two people like that, and now you will have a dispute that will never be resolved. So check the attitude. Now, granted, as you were describing this, the most difficult situation I can think of would be, let's say Valharic and I have got a dispute, and he's one of my best friends. I would never have one, but let's just take two people. And I go to him and say, hey, Val, I think you hit me. And yeah, I know you won that fight, but I think I got you first. And he said, well, you just don't like losing, do you? Maybe you ought to get better. Go home and practice and come back when you don't suck anymore.
This sounds like personal experience. Wait a second.
We're just picking arbitrary names. I'm not saying nothing about nothing, but I think the thing is genuine as you can be, you can have a very negative, poisonous attitude thrown back in your face. And I've seen this happen. Unfortunately, Val's a perfect gentleman. It never happened with anybody like him, but there are people out there, and I think everybody knows it. There are people like that who you go and you try to be earnest and honest and just say, hey, you know, I don't want to make a big fuss, but this is what the impression I got. And they're like, you just suck, get better, and you won't have this problem. So, you know, but maintain your positive attitude. Never let somebody else's negativity become your negativity. Walk away and just say, fine, you won your fight, whatever. You know, it doesn't pay to carry that baggage around with you and allow their poison to become your poison. I really like that phrase that I heard years ago. It said, hatred is drinking poison thinking it's going to kill the other guy. And that's really all you're doing. You're basically committing a form of spiritual suicide. It pays just to let it go. And I assure you, the SCA is not a serious enough game for you to poison yourself because of the actions of another person.
Val, you had something?
Yeah, Val.
Yeah, and it ties right into this. One of the things that I hear a lot, and it always raises every hair on the back of my neck, is when you're marshaling and you call a hold and you have to discuss something with an individual and they immediately, are you calling my honor in question? Are you impugning my honor?
Mm-hmm.
I hate that.
Yes.
And I always answer it the same way. I say, no, sir, or no, ma'am. That is not my intent. My intent is to preserve your honor. That is why I am here. I also feel like the way that you address that is not to say, hey, you're missing some shots. Hey, what about that? Hey, what about this? It's, I want to let you know that there are clear, unimpeded blows landing in legal target areas. I cannot judge the calibration of that blow, but you are being hit in a legal target area, and that is the optics of the situation. How do you feel?
Yes,
Your
you're
put
right.
questions like that to individuals, they have to respond. And if they respond with, I don't feel like I'm being hit, it's, you are certainly being hit.
Yes, Your Grace. Absolutely. And it is an excellent reminder you bring up. We are marshals. We are not referees. And the fighters need to understand that. We need to come to it in as neutral a possibility as can exist. And as you said, Your Grace, we're looking out for everyone's honor. We have no stake in the fight. We're just marshals.
Well said.
So here's a question. I'm gonna just something I think people would want to hear, and I'll be the first one to start. I'm gonna ask each of you if you ever been called out, and I will tell you I was at a shiv retreat. Our shiv retreat is where all the chivalry go and have just a weekend of pizza and beer and hang out and fight. It's a very relaxed time for us. We get to fight with our friends that we grew up with. And that were our brothers in arms that we hardly get the chance to fight anymore because they spend a lot of time helping other people now. But at that event, His Majesty was talking and literally just kind of going through some things, and he runs across something talking to me and says, and then you got Brannos who doesn't, that sometimes doesn't talk about what happened, and I was like, all right, what do you mean? Right. And he kind of kept moving on. There was lots of other conversation going. Next day I went to him. I said, so what do you mean by that comment? He's like, well, there's a lot of stuff. Sometimes you get hit and there's that fundamental feel that, it's not good, but you're not communicating it to your opponent. So they don't. And, it's not that you're missing blows necessarily, but you're not communicating what's happening to those blows. Like it was tippy, it was whatever it was. So it was, there's that place where even though it wasn't good, the vision or the view of it wasn't good for my opponent. So I spent a lot of time, I took it to heart, and I spent a lot of time after fights saying, hey, everything that touched me, if it touched me, I'm like, hey, just to let you know that touched me. I just felt like it was light. If you have an issue, then let's keep going, let's talk. But, and they're like, no, keep going, But then at the end, I was like, everything good? And those little checks allow your opponent to be part of the conversation. I've been in fights where I am not part of the conversation. I'll hit somebody, they're like, nope, and they move on. Nope, they move on. And I tell you the truth, and I might have been a dick in these, but I still do it sometimes because I'll be like, bang, I'll hit them. They're like, nope, and I'll be like, yep, and then I keep fighting. I don't ask people to take it, but I have the right to also be truthful to my opponent. If he wants to talk about it, I'll be like, no, I did think I hit you in the arm. You don't need to take it. I just want to know, to let you know how I think. Right. And, in that case, he didn't give any opportunity. So it was no big deal. I'm not asking him to take shots. I'm just letting him know how I thought. It was, not a place you want to be in, but sometimes you end up in that place. But the big piece, guys, is you get called out. I've been called out for walking over a dead person. In other words, I am so in the game, I hit somebody and walk over their dead body. And I'm looking for my next person. And this is a tournament. I knew that shot was going to be perfect. And it was. I did absolutely my job. My head is in a mindset that there is me and my opponent and nobody else. And after I was done, somebody came over. It's like, hey, you look like an ass. Just to let you know. I was like, yeah, you're right. And I went and apologized to guys like, what? But it doesn't matter. There's a vision there. So just beware. So we all get called out, right? I mean, Thorfinn, how have you been called out?
Well, okay, so I'm going to tell you a story about a failure of mine and my miscommunication with my opponents, right? I was a squire. I was training with Sagan. I was doing really well. And my knight came to my local shire and he hosted a tournament. And in this tournament, I was kicking ass, right? I was doing really well. I got to the finals and I was fighting against my squire brother who was relatively new. And he hit me with a shot. And this is the time that I can tell for sure in my life, the one time I cheated in the SCA, is that I knew that he hit me with a good shot. But my ego was so out of line that I said to myself, no way he's good enough to do this yet, right?
Yes.
And what happened was I won the tournament. My knight basically shunned me, and he gave him the prize. Okay. Now then he said Thorfinn won, right? That's what my knight said, right? But then he gave him all the accolades and all the praise, and I was like, what the fuck, man, right? But I held that shit inside for 4 years, right? And then me and him were having wine one day. I used to work at this place called the Bohemian Grove, and me and him were up at the Bohemian Grove drinking wine, sitting on the counter in my kitchen. And I looked at him and said, I have to tell you something. I cheated against you 4 years ago. And he was like, I don't even remember what you're talking about. That's the thing, is that he was a person who had faith and trust, and he walked away from that with nothing, right? I carried it for 4 years. And I did by this point. I had seen success at this point, and that was the one thing gnawing at me. It was gnawing at me. The fact that I had failed, a failure of character, right? I have used that as a tool the rest of my career, right? Is like, don't be that ever again. And that was a failure on my side to communicate and have faith and trust with my opponent. And so when I talk about these things, I'm talking about it from experience, guys, is that my failure has been like a weight. So don't do that. Thanks.
Valharic?
Yeah, I was called out in the finals of the Crown tournament I won in Atlanta by my opponent and my very good friend. And I had just won the tournament, and I could tell that he was upset. And I was in the place where they were going to give me the crown. And I walked over to him and I said, "What's up?" He was very, very hot, but handled himself like a gentleman. And he said, I don't believe you won that fair and square. I don't believe you took that fight. I said, the fight we just had. He said, no, you won that clearly. He said, our first fight, I think I I killed you. And I said, well, here's how I feel about it. I said, if you no longer have the trust in me that's necessary for us to continue a friendship, I can't be your king, and this crown belongs to you. And he said, nope, right guy won. And he walked away.
Yep. It's hard.
There is nothing, and I'm not trying to virtue signal or anything. There is nothing more important to me than my honor. It is the only thing that I indelibly own, and I am the only person who can give that away. Nobody can take that. Nobody's words infringe that honor. It's my actions that define that.
Yeah.
And there is nothing that you can tempt me with that will make me trade that.
So Tristan.
Yeah, I do remember being called out, and it was the last Pennsic that I was at and attended. And just as a bit of background, I always felt if I ever won a fight, it had to be absolutely 100% crystal clear that there is no doubt that I won. I wanted to win by the sword. I didn't want to win by negotiation. I didn't want to have my opponent feel like he was robbed. I really just enjoy fighting. I love it. It's not that I'm there for a win. I'm just there to enjoy the process of it. But when I started competing in crowns and royal tournaments, I wanted to have zero doubt by anybody watching from close or far that I didn't prevail cleanly, and there was no stain on my competitiveness. And that was kind of my reputation. People had told me, like, Tristan, you're so fun to fight because you can tell that you don't really, yes, you want to win, but you like seeing other people win, even if it's at your expense. So that said, I was fighting in the Allied Champions battle at Pennsic. And for those who don't know, it's basically they choose like 100 champions of the Allied kingdoms to fight on a massive, like 2-hour resurrection battle. And these are all usually spread out. They're spread out from the different Allied kingdoms. So there's probably 10 or 12 generally from each kingdom. So they take the top, unbelts and belts and throw them in there. And it's very competitive, and it's probably the best 2-hour battle you're ever going to fight, because everybody out there is solid. Unlike a lot of melees where, you get people of all experience levels. At any rate, I got my shield, and it's a kite shield, and I get caught, and there's 4 guys coming after me, and I'm like, I got nowhere to go. And I just decide to charge straight into them. And I turtle up, I drop my sword down behind my head, tuck behind my shield, and I kind of blast through them. And my body armor was, there are Band-Aids that are bigger than my body armor. I had like two kidney plates, and that was about it. And I didn't feel anything except the bumping of the shields. And I went right through the middle of the 2 middle guys. And they immediately started screaming like, you're cheating. We took you out. And I'm like, I'm doing the check. You roll your eyes back and you're like, where's the sting? You're looking, trying to feel where that sting landed. And I'm like, guys, I seriously don't think you landed a shot. And by this time a marshal comes over. He's like, you're Sir Knight or whatever he said, that really looked bad. I think, I'm just trying to help you protect your honor. And I said, gentlemen, if you feel that was good, I'm going to retire the field. So I saluted them. I left, and I did not go back on the field. But I was so upset by it. I didn't even walk away from the edge of the field before I stripped my armor down. And I said, somebody, I want you to, is there a mark on my back? Did I really miss a shot? It bothered me that much. And in retrospect, there was no mark. There was no red spot or anything. I'd never felt a sting, honest to God, there wasn't a shot there, which is very out of place. I was very in touch with my body fighting wise. I never have had any dead spots or, too much armor, or have been numb to not feel shots that landed even through my armor, much less I was just pretty much wearing a shirt. But that interaction did haunt me. Like, did I really miss one? I don't think I did, but I also am happy that I resigned the field. Like, I don't want those guys feeling like that I was out there trying to cheat and stay alive when I got honestly hit. So there's mine.
Sagan, we got about 15 minutes. You will probably run a little bit over, but.
Why? Yeah, thanks for saving the old guy till last.
Well,
So,
this is an age-old problem, right?
As many of you know, I am of limited tournament experience due to personal decisions. However, in the early days, this was one of the cautions that I observed immediately and that I spoke to my knight about in order to be able to deal with it. And I was called out a couple of times. And as I was instructed by my knight, there is nothing that cannot be resolved by one of two things: a refight or resigning. And I used both of those tools a number of times over the years. And communication was key. Again, when I was confronted, I was calm, I was centered, and I greeted my opponent with the respect that they are due. And I understood, okay, there's a difference of opinion here, and I may have missed something. And for me, that was, as Tristan said, a big concern. Always has been. It just is that way. And so from that point of view, I moved forward. And in that point of view, it served me well. The place it really served me well was as a trainer and passing that information and that lesson on. There is nothing that excellent communication cannot resolve in a positive manner. And it is your choice. How would you go about resolving this? If you know for a fact that you missed the call, resign the fight. If you're unsure, do not be unkind and try and absolutely state you're wrong. There is a way to successfully mitigate this. To His Grace Thorfinn, I'm sorry, my brother. Guilt is a gift that keeps on giving. And I am very sorry to hear that you suffered from it for 4 years, but I am glad you took the opportunity to resolve it.
So there are a couple other points, and I was just writing to Tristan here. There's a couple more points that are on Tristan's list, but I think we got a little bit of time left. And I think first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask His Grace Valharic if he wouldn't mind coming back at some point to continue this conversation. I think there is some great stuff in the comments, and everyone post other stuff, and we'll just go through all the questions in an episode. But the one part I think everybody wants to know is do cheaters get away with it in the SCA? Let's be real.
Yes,
we sometimes look at crowns and go, well, he's the crown because he's a big ass cheater. You don't think people say that? We hear, come on, we hear it all the time.
Yes, Your Grace.
Right?
Yes.
So can, Val, you've been involved. In fact, we talked a little bit before we started this. Tristan and Valharic were both involved in an episode, and I'd like you guys just no names again, but and let's talk about that just a little bit, and then Val, can you just cover some of the uglier things that had to happen to people because of stuff?
Sure.
Oh my.
It's all you, Val.
So during my first reign, when I was in the mid-realm, went to an event and had an individual and a royal peer behave in so many terrible ways, so many different times. And clearly this was a long history of him having bad behavior and not being held accountable. And I was a new, fresh king, and it happened, and I saw it, and I witnessed it. And he came before me, and he held out his wrist, and he says, "I'm ready for the slap on the wrist." Well, at that point, there had been so much that I was like, I didn't even know how to respond to that. I was so incredibly angry. And there were my whole weekend was spent hearing how this individual had ruined this event, this tournament, this person's outlook on the SCA. And for them to think so little of that they thought that they were going to get a slap on the wrist and for that to be okay. I've never been more angry and more upset, but yet had to figure out a way to temper that with judgment and process, and also the burden of protecting all of those people and all of the people that he'll meet tomorrow. And it happened, and I saw it, and I witnessed it, and he came of protecting all of those people. And
we're getting an echo.
That he'll meet tomorrow.
Sorry, that was me.
Okay.
And yeah, ultimately, not only did this individual leave the society by invite of the board of directors, but he was also stripped of his peerages, which is about the worst thing we as a group have.
And I think the key there, Val, is the reason why this, just real quick, and I'm going to throw it back at you, but one thing I want to make sure people know, this is the end. This is, and you might think, why didn't we start with this, right? Because it's really nothing we ever want to start with. We want everybody to be able to help and build themselves and be part of our society. This is the very end. This is when we have no options. This is the part we try to avoid as much as we can. And it does happen. And Val can tell you how it happens a lot more than people ever even know. So I'm going to throw that back at you, Val. I just wanted to let people know we are talking about this last and maybe for a short time, because in the end, none of us won. And this none means everybody. We spend much more time trying to fix stuff than get to this point. Val?
The process involved in getting to this point is long and difficult, and must be done with exacting results, and must be backed up and proven, because you never want to level the highest penalty on someone and not have done the due diligence to make sure that it is the just thing to do. It does happen, and it happens a lot more than we realize. There's a lot of unfortunate ugly that bleeds into our society, and a lot of it is easy and it's clean cut. I mean, if there's a police report, then there's a police report and we're done and we don't need to talk about this. But the really, really difficult issues is when people have put their self and their reputation and the reputation of the society in such jeopardy by their actions that there is no other route. And we all need to watch for that. We all need to be each other's keepers. And we all need to have an honest dialogue between each other. I need to know that if I'm fucking up, pardon my language, I'm probably not allowed to swear, but I did.
It's all good, as Thorfinn shows us.
But that one of you or one of my other hundreds of brothers or your squire or someone can come to me and say, what is going on? You need to account for yourself. And we all need to strive to be humble enough to realize that when that happens, we have a responsibility to either accept the problem, fix the problem, and most importantly, make sure that that issue never happens again with yourself or anyone else that you can stop from making the same mistake.
I think one thing I want to make sure that people out there know is that it's not always just up to the people in their kingdom to discipline people in their own kingdom. And this is not just about fighting, but it's a little bit about everything. There's a a little saying that gets told out there of brass poisoning. And what that is ego. And egos get very big. We see it in stars when they become bigger and bigger stars. They take in less and less feedback from people, and that gets tough. And we have that same position in our society. And I will tell you that there are people that work with the bod, work with kingdoms, work with the crowns to help weed out these people, or at least look at the cases, try to set them on the right road, knowing that the road may change if they're not willing to change. And there are a lot of people that have been asked to take time off. There's a lot of people that have sanctions against fighting. There's people that have sanctions against fighting in crowns. In your own kingdom, many kingdoms have the ability to not invite people to their own crown. The king has that ability, right? And exercises it. You have the ability to
exercise it more.
Yeah, well, and this is where it comes. You have the ability to write a letter and say, I don't think this person makes a good king, or would be good in crown tournament, or as my king, because I don't think he's an honorable person. Right? Write it much better than I just said it, by the way. But it's on all of us. If the king doesn't know, he can't make that good decision. And if it's just you, sure, but you don't know if it's just you or not. One letter, I'm like, well, one letter, a guy don't like each other, that shit happens. 20 letters, I'm like, sorry, buddy, don't have a choice, you're out.
I think too, being that there has been so many R&Ds in the last 5 to 10 years, I think this indicates what happens when the low level problems don't get dealt with and they get ignored and they grow into big problems. And those bigger problems are examples for yet other people coming up to become their own problems. And so just in terms of scope, it's one of those, it's much easier to solve a small problem than it is to solve a big problem. Valharic. Oh.
One thing people need to know is that it is not all right. It is not all right because I'm a duke. It is not all right because I am a knight. It is not all right because I am the baron. If you are treated in a way that you feel is fundamentally wrong, that's not all right. And you have recourse. And you need to say so. And you need to say so to someone loud enough that they take action. Because it's not all right. Just isn't.
Thorfinn, you're taking your glasses off. You look like you have something to say.
Maybe for a second.
You're getting a little riled up over there?
Yeah. No, so I got a couple examples of like success and failure and having to sanction someone. So something we talked about earlier was the idea that there's a kind of like a social calibration, right? Where some people say like, in situational, this guy counts harder in tournaments than he does or whatever, right? And there was a kid that I was helping train, and he was just like bulletproof. I mean, he's one of these people who he's just tough as like coffin nails, right? And he had no idea that he fought in a linen shirt. He had no idea that people thought that he had a high calibration. And then when we approached him about it, it was shattering to him, right? But the thing is that he was a person who was physically just tough as hell, right? And so he didn't register those blows. His body was like, we'll deal with that shit later, right? And he would be an incredible real warrior, right? But he was a person that when we mentioned it, you could see change happen immediately. Like, holy God, I had no idea, right? So that's a success of communication. Before I won my first crown, when I was kind of getting that point where you think you're going to get there, I was running into one particular duke who had a legendarily high calibration, and I mean, it got to where every fight I had with him, because he was like the barrier, right, for me to get to that next level, he would be out there, and then all the marshals from the whole damn field would suddenly start circling around, and for me, I was like, oh my God, what have I been doing? And then fortunately, one of them pulled me aside and said, hey, we're not here to watch you. We're here to watch him. And my success was that, I was just going to hit him until he hit me, because my job is to take blows when I'm hit. That's my job as a fighter, right? So when my opponent hits me and I die, that's my job, right? It's their job to take blows, and I can't make them do their job. Okay, and so eventually it became a point where I could embarrass him to death, and I got past that. Okay, and now I'm going to tell you a little bit about when we talked about having someone that we sanction, right? There was a guy in our kingdom who I sanctioned from fighting in my crown tournament, and he was very much a strong contender, but he was going through kind of a weird phase in his career, which was, I think at the time I thought was unkingly, right? His behaviors were so negative that I couldn't allow him to assume the throne, because then he would misrepresent the kingdom. And I had to actually say to myself, if I'm going to use the power that I have as the crown to say, you don't get to be in this tournament, and use it as a kind of a focus and a learning lesson for that person. And you know what? It worked. That person, a little bit introspective, he stepped back and he grew as a person, because maybe somebody had the courage to tell him and correct him. And I think that's kind of what happened there. So I'm really happy, and we're still very good friends. Okay, so even though it was very much a pain for him, right? The thing that I took away the thing he wanted most. And that was something he learned to then say, wait a minute, let's reevaluate where we're at. And he did that. If you encounter these people, guys, on the field, especially, and we can have a whole discussion about how to address people and their failures off the field. But on the field, if you have a continuous issue and you have done the kind of due diligence, like you've gone through the grievance procedure, you've gone to them, and you've gone to the marshalate and things like that, right? Write a letter to the marshalate, so that way there is a letter on file.
Yes.
That when all these things come down to it, we talked about this a few minutes ago, when it really comes down to the final moments when we are going to say, like, hey, this person has a tradition of bad behavior, and here's the documentation. So what you want to do is you have a voice here. Use it. All right. Don't be afraid to use your voice. And so that in that way you affect the entire fighting community and you make it healthier. All right. Be true to yourself and true to what you want to say. Right. Don't put your ego in it. Don't put any kind of agenda. Just say, this is what we're talking about. And then you actually can then help the entire fighting community. Thanks a lot, guys.
So we're going to kind of wrap up with the last pieces of the talk. I think Thorfinn already kind of covered a really nice job of that. I'm going to end with you, Val, just to let you know, and I'll sign off the group. But Sagan, do you have any last thoughts on this? Just to let you know, we're right at 9 o'clock.
Yes, sir. Again, we've talked about it a lot. Ownership, honesty, accountability, we've covered in a lot of vectors. Trust. If you trust someone enough to fight them, surely you trust them enough to talk to them. The populace, their perception is their reality. And lastly, if you're not part of the solution, you may be part of the problem.
Well said. Tristan?
Yeah, actually, I don't know if you want to address that question that you put down on the bottom here.
Yeah, actually, I saw that. I addressed it a little bit in the, I'll address it at the very end here.
Okay. Just two real quick things. And these were kind of come from my list that I put together. And that is, and this is the point is stay on point and avoid indulging in rumors. If there's anything that has caused more harm in the SCA, it's people back talking each other, rumors, scuttlebutt. This is advice I give to every peer in their vigil who wants advice about being a peer or being a knight. And I'll say, your job is to be a political damper. You are not there to start wildfires or to spread them. You're there to help put them out. And it's easy and fun for some people to indulge in things like rumors and talking about people. And we live in a world that points us out. Bad news gets around halfway around the world before the truth gets its boots on. And oftentimes those rumors are based on lies or misunderstandings, misperceptions, and even evil intent. So the attitude is everything. So try to go to the source whenever possible and try to solve the problem directly and smoothly if you can. The second point that we didn't get to quite yet, and that is you want to give the person that you're confronting an honorable path to redemption. You're not there to corner them, and they will, any human being or animal, when they are cornered, you will see their most vicious behavior. You want to negotiate with them, and and that kind of covers the theme that we've been talking about all evening, is how do you have a good, meaningful discussion? But you have to have the intent and attitude in your heart, like you want this resolved. It's not about you winning over them and you beating them in terms of your reputation, or making everybody see what a bastard that other guy is. If that's your intention, then you're not gonna get anywhere positive. So we're all stewards of the society. And you may think, I'm not even a squire, I'm just a little person out here, a little fighter. Yeah, you have a morsel of responsibility like everybody else, like we all do. So take it on with that attitude. That's what I guess I would wrap that up on.
That was really good. Thank you very much for that. Valharic.
There's been so many good things said. The main thing is to remember that most of this stuff can be solved by having a candid, honest conversation. Don't be afraid to talk to anybody. Don't be afraid to ask a hard question, but also be prepared to take a hard answer. And remember that everything's a mirror, and what you are seeing in others are seeing in you. And you need to keep that in mind when dealing and navigating these situations. And there's no urgency in finding the truth. The importance is finding the truth and giving it the time that it needs. There is no problem that can't be put off until the proper solution is found. You don't have to rush through things. I don't think anybody gets into this and decides that they want to be the bad guy. Well, maybe somebody wants to be the bad guy, but most people, when you prevail on the better angels of their personality, will take the honorable route. And it's very important, like Tristan said, is to help them see that route and help them stay on that route. I think that's all I got.
All right. No, that was wonderful. Guys, Thorfinn, are you set? All right. So guys, I mean, I'm sitting here like probably just like all the people watching, and we had a lot of people on tonight. We had a lot of great conversation in our comments that I think we should all go through and take a look at what came up in there, and how maybe maybe we'll ask a few folks back, maybe even have Val and a couple other guests that are really passionate about this, including.
I always love to hear more from Val.
Yes.
Including the last person who threw something out at me, because I believe that was Quill, and he was just on a segment, I think, with Sean on another show, and they talked about this too. We talk about it. We are passionate about trying to make the society as good for everybody as possible, and we all make mistakes, including you, including me. In the end, I came on early, and I'll say it again, I'm the eternal optimist here. I think we all try to go in the right path, and sometimes we lose it. And the big key is to be open enough to be aware that you're hurting others sometimes, or that you're disappointing others, and really take that in and make changes to make it a better society. So I know I would absolutely love to talk a little bit more about other specific items. If you guys have them, please, if you don't want to put it out in the public, ping any one of us, private message us, email us. It doesn't matter. We would love to have another conversation like this. the conversation in the comments was just as good as our conversation. And I will say we're not perfect, none of us. I would say we have to look for the best parts in other people and try to help them realize that, you know, those best parts are incredible, and the parts that they're not doing so well, they need to work on. And we also have to give people the chance to make the change. I hear this all the time. The knights, you know, a knight in a meeting is like, well, you know, he still doesn't take shots, you know. Well, yeah, that was 10 years ago. You haven't let go of that yet? How long are you going to keep that bone? Well, I see it go on the other side too, where, you know, oh, that guy never takes shots. And then he gets a talking to, and maybe you don't know because he's getting a private talking to. But you also don't want to let that up. You don't let it go. You want to hold that bone. And so just be careful, because in that space, you're actually being the problem as well. So I hope everybody enjoyed the episode. I know we have, I sure did. Just being had a chance to hang out with Valharic is always incredible, and listening to him is incredible. Next week, actually on Monday, we have Sean's back. Thorfinn, are you doing that one with them?
Yeah, I'll be on that.
Sweet. So they got a couple more on belts that they're going to do video review of. It's been great on Mondays. It's a great way to learn video review. It can help yourself break your own videos down and your own fighting. And so that's going to be on Monday. Tristan, you know what we have next Sunday?
Yeah, we're actually starting a trilogy about coaching, training, and teaching. And I know on this episode, we probably bit off more than we can chew because it's just such a deep topic. We also feel that how to bring the best out in other fighters is a big topic. So we're going to break this into 3 episodes. And in the first one next week, I believe Brannos is going to cover the definition differences between a coach, a trainer, and a teacher, which you could also call as an instructor. And it seems like these are all the same role, but they're really not. They're very distinctive and different roles. And if you get confused thinking you're doing one and you're actually doing another, you can confuse the people you're trying to mentor. So I think this is going to be a great lead in for this trilogy. The second one is going to be the good, the bad, and the ugly of coaching, which I think is going to be a little humorous, but I think we're going to share some stories about do's and do nots of being a good coach, being a good teacher, being a good instructor. And then the last one in the trilogy is going to be instructing at the next level. Like how do you really get the best out of somebody, not just show them how to do a new shot or some footwork, but really work with somebody over an extended period of time and get their best. So we're looking forward to that trilogy coming out.
Yeah, should be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. So Vesper, thank you once again. I know you were busy out there, so
My fingers hurt now after typing. Yeah, we had a lot of people that were really interested in this. I think it's a great idea if you guys expand on it in the future.
Yeah, I think we'll set it up a little bit more, and I think with everybody else's help that's been watching all night, we would absolutely like to build a little more structure and cover some more stuff for you all, and even bring on some other guests and really broaden it out. I think it's a conversation everybody has in quiet, and we don't talk about it. And you guys covered this earlier, all of you guys. We don't talk about it enough outside to show that we have the same feelings, and here's what we do about it. And I think that's one of the big things. So I think just having one episode is probably not enough, like you said.
And we'd like to hear what you, the listeners, the aspects you would like to hear from. I know one of the ones I've had many private conversations is what does the chivalry do to police their own? And that could be one whole episode right there. But anything that you have, whether it's stress within your household, your barony or your shire, groups, things, we'd love to have some fuel for our fire to talk about, good ways to deal with things like that.
Yeah. So we want to wrap it up.
Yeah, I guess that's it for us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. First, but thanks to everybody who watched. I think we had like 50 people watching at one point, which was great. Thank you guys. I'm just amazed every time I'm lucky enough to sit around you guys.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah,
and
it's an honor.
I feel the same, guys. I feel the same.
And Vesper, I think everybody, you brought a bright light to a very dark time, and you keep shining it and helping people see the way out. And I can't thank you enough for that.
Thank you.
Yep. Absolutely. Brannos, we need to double her pay.
I agree. Maybe a big bonus.
Yeah, you go ahead. You write the check.
Well, thank you all again, and we will see everybody next Friday, but also Monday. Don't forget Monday. So everybody have a wonderful weekend, and we will catch up with you all soon.
All right.
Good
Bye,
night,
guys.
everybody.
Good night.
Have a great weekend. Stay safe.
Bye.